They've made themselves the center of attention at the Olympics at no cost.
The vice president clearly seems to want to keep the heat on North Korea.
Attempting to just dismiss it as another effort by the North Koreans to divide the South from the United States.
One of their objectives by participating in the Olympics is to see if they can get any relief from those sanctions.
Over the past 30 years, the gap has widened further.
And it was North Korea that sanctioned itself as the South Koreans jumped headlong into a globalized economy.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eunjung Cho. The 2018 Winter Olympics kicked off in Pyeongchang, South Korea, and the two Koreas marched under a unified flag. Vice President Mike Pence is representing the United States at the Olympics, and he is reminding the world the need for continued maximum pressure on North Korea.
We will not allow North Korea to hide behind the Olympic banner the reality that they enslave their people and threaten the wider region.
Now my guest today, Mr. Robert Manning, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He spent 15 years in the U.S. government, including the ODNI and the State Department. Also joining me today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, President of the Mansfield Foundation. He was a former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Frank, let me begin with you. Vice President Pence met with North Korean defectors, and he also paid tribute to sailors killed by North Korean torpedo attack. What is Vice President Pence's main goal during the Olympics?
Well, the vice president clearly seems to want to keep the heat on North Korea and to make sure that this Olympic peace period, the charm offensive that North Korea is engaged in, doesn't distract people from another reality, which is that North Korea remains in defiance of the United Nations on UN sanctions related to its missile and nuclear programs, and that the North Korean human rights record is also a very poor one. I think the vice president, though, is running a little counter to the spirit that President Moon is trying to generate at these games. The grievances of the South Korean people and the United States toward the North, no matter how legitimate they may be in terms of the North's misconduct and bad behavior and bad human rights record, that shouldn't be, in my view, front and center at a time when President Moon is trying to create an atmosphere of peace and reconciliation and trying to get a little bit of traction on the hard issues of security on the peninsula that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Frank, is the U.S.'s hard stance sort of causing a friction with Seoul's desire for better relationship with North Korea, is it?
Well, I hope that the two governments, South Korea and the United States, will be able to get more on the same page. You know, for now, the tone is pretty starkly different. I do believe that at a working level, the two governments are coordinating closely. But clearly President Moon, when he sits down with high-level visitors from the North, he's going to try to set a positive, warm, constructive tone. And I think the Vice President's messaging has been a little bit off-key.
Mm-hmm. Robert, Vice President repeatedly said that he will not allow North Korean propaganda hijack the messaging of the Olympics. What is Washington most concerned about North Korea joining the Olympic Games?
Well, I think they're concerned about this kind of charm offensive that I have to give the North Koreans credit for pretty brilliant public relations. They've made themselves the center of attention at the Olympics at no cost. And so I give them credit for that. I think that's an issue of concern for Pence. Frankly, I think it ought to be an issue of concern for President Moon because it's his Olympics. And I think there's a lot of opinion in South Korea that is troubled by some of the accommodating actions he's taken to the North Koreans.
Robert, Vice President only made a brief appearance to the reception hosted by President Moon, and there are speculations that this is because he wanted to avoid encountering with Kim Young-nam, the ceremonial head of state of North Korea. Why do you think he only made a brief appearance?
I think that's probably correct, that he wants to maintain his distance from the whole sort of specter of détente that's going on. I think that's a mistake. You know, it's not that he's wrong in pointing out the horrendous human rights abuses of North Korea. It's a tactical issue. There are times to do things and there are times not to do things. And he doesn't seem to be able to distinguish between the two. And I think that, you know, he's raining on Moon's parade, which is, you know, it's somewhat impolite to do that to an ally, for starters. And secondly, you know, we know that they want maximum pressure. We know they want sanctions. They've done a good job at mobilizing the whole international community behind that. But we haven't heard much about diplomacy and what they mean by it and how they get there. And so unless he's got an idea, I think you have to defer to Moon, who's at least trying to do something.
Well, I think there is a significance for Vice President Pence to reiterate the maximum pressure on North Korea, because people seem to be getting carried away, and you know, North Korea is sending high-level officials on U.S. and UN sanctions lists. Is North Korea out to undermine UN sanctions?
Well, I think it goes back to Bob's point about tactics. I think the North Koreans are feeling some heat from the international sanctions, and I'm pretty confident that one of their objectives by participating in the Olympics and trying to warm up North-South relations is to see if they can get any relief from those sanctions. So we need to be, we meaning the United States and South Korea, need to be really resolute in insisting that if North Korea wants sanctions relief, they need to address the specific security concerns that the United Nations has identified that, you know, are causing the sanctions in the first place. But then I think that President Moon, you know, he needs to really make sure that he's getting reciprocity from the North. Any kind of relaxation of the South Korean pressure on the North needs to be as a result of North Korea accommodating the demands of the international community, and those steps also should be reciprocated by North Korea.
Robert, what is North Korea's political agenda? It is sending the highest levels of officials to South Korea.
That's a good question. You know, I think it's more than a charm offensive. It's tempting to just dismiss it as another effort by the North Koreans to divide the South from the United States, and that's certainly part of it. But I think there's something else going on. Otherwise, why send your essentially official head of state and your sister to Seoul? And I wouldn't be at all surprised that when President Moon hosts his lunch with the North Korean delegation, that they put a possible summit on the table. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And you know, I'm of two minds on this, because on the one hand, we forget North Korea blew up an airplane the last time the South was about to hold an Olympics. So from one perspective, President Moon is essentially a low-cost insurance policy that this Olympics goes smoothly and doesn't get disrupted by the North. So you have to give him that. But on the other hand, he's got a difficult balancing act, because you know, him and his party are very interested in North-South relations and North-South reconciliation, but at the same time, he's got to balance that against the denuclearization policy. And it's not clear how you do that. I don't see how you can have a summit if the North Koreans' going-in position is we're a nuclear state, and that's the basis on which we're going to talk.
Right, South Koreans never even mentioned about nuclear issue at all during this process.
Well, as far as we know, that's right, Yoon Jung. I hope that the South Korean government may have a chance to raise the security issues at future meetings during this Olympic period. But I think Bob's point is a really good one. If President Moon is going to host a summit or go to attend a summit with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, he ought to insist on the North showing sufficient respect to the South. The last two summits have both been held in Pyongyang. You know, why not have a summit, if there is to be one, held in Seoul or Jeju-do? It's really not appropriate for the South Koreans to be giving, and the North Koreans to be taking.
So what's going to happen after the Olympics, the post-Olympics period? Chargé d'Affaires in Seoul told VOA that joint military exercises will take place in April. So what do you think will happen, Robert?
Well, I think the most likely scenario is that the exercises will go ahead. And there's a date, it's wrong to equate our military exercises with North Korean missile and nuclear tests.
That's right.
You can't have an alliance if you don't train together. On the other hand, what North Korea is doing violates the entire judgment of the international community, UN Security Council resolutions. So this equation, I think, is really wrong-headed. But I think North Korea has to test. They do not have a working ICBM. They're, in my view, at least 2 to 3 years away from it, although I think the White House has, in my view, mistakenly said it's right about to happen. Mm-hmm. And so in order to make it happen, they have to test. And so they need several more tests. And then we're back to where we were before the Olympics of this state of tension. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of concern that the White House is trying to figure out some low-cost way to do a military strike.
And Frank, how do you see the post-Olympics period?
Well, look, there's an opportunity right now for the North and the South and the United States to try to structure the post-Olympic period in a way that the tension does not return to the pre-Olympic period. And I think what's required is for the South to sit down with the North and really anticipate what is going to come. The exercises will happen. That doesn't mean they have to be the cause of great tension. There could be observing arrangements made so the North could witness the South Korean exercises and vice versa. There could be confidence and security building measures put in place that would avoid a return to this dangerous tit-for-tat military maneuvers.
Mm-hmm. We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next topic. The last time South Korea hosted the Olympics was in 1988. It was a chance for South Korea to showcase its rapid economic development and democratic institutions. Over the past 30 years, the gap between South and North Korea has widened further.
What you have built is truly an inspiration. Your economic transformation was linked to a political one. The regime has pursued nuclear weapons with the deluded hope that it could blackmail its way to the ultimate objective.
Now you see a picture here of South Korea illuminated and North Korea in pitch dark. How is this picture revealing the stark economic difference between the two countries, Robert?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that you have a South Korean economy that's roughly 40 times the size of the North Korea. The Republic of Korea is a cutting-edge, advanced industrial country. It's leading the world in many areas of technology. I think it's the 11th or 12th largest economy in the world. North Korea is an economic basket case and a terror state that keeps people in place by the force and the use of force, and has no economic dynamism. It's a self-imposed isolation. People talk about sanctions, but for 50 years it was a North Korea that sanctioned itself by withdrawing from the international community as the South Koreans jumped headlong into a globalized economy and succeeded very well. So I think that's really the story here.
I agree with Bob, and if you looked at this picture 60 years ago at the end of the hot period of the Korean War, you would have seen rough parity between North and South in terms of economic development, in terms of electrification and industrialization. If anything, the North was ahead of the South throughout much of the early years of the DPRK and the Republic of Korea. So part of what's striking to me about this Yunjong is the incredible speed with which the South has developed, and in comparison to the North, which through its own mismanagement has really stayed a very poor and backward state economically. It also, to me, belies the idea that North Korea could ever absorb and govern South Korea. The disparity in population, the disparity in economic wealth, the disparity in political and cultural strength is so great at this point that I think that vision really is off the table.
Robert, how did the alliance relationship with the United States help South Korea become the prosperous country and democratic country it is now?
Well, I think in the whole post-World War II period, the U.S. military presence and security guarantees are underpinned all of these stages of success: Japan, Korea, ASEAN countries, and so on. And I think that's one of that plus the open markets of the U.S. to their export-led economies was a formula that really let East Asia rise.
Yeah.
And there's no question about that. The alliance was critical in that respect.
It begins with peace and security.
Right.
And absent peace and security, it's hard to have development. This is what Deng Xiaoping realized when he opened China in '79. And it's really, I think it is part of the ambition of Kim Jong-un. He would like to get the security piece through his nuclear weapons. He'd like to have development for his own country because he knows how far behind he must be.
On that point, Frank, what level of development do you anticipate if North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons?
Well, look, if they were to give up their nuclear weapons and come back into the fold of the international community, I think North Korea would advance quite rapidly. I don't know about their ability to maintain political cohesion and stability at home, but economically, the North Korean people are not different fundamentally from the South Korean people. They're hardworking, smart, well-educated, literate. They could make great, rapid advances if they were out from under international sanctions and if their own government were managing them in a more efficient and humane and open way.
Robert?
There's a reason the North Korean government has not followed a path that China and Vietnam, other communist authoritarian states have taken. They're terrified that a productive economy would threaten their Kim dynasty rule. And so that's a problem. I think it's also a problem in terms of the nuclear issue because in the previous negotiations, we had a comprehensive deal on the table that offered. What was interesting about it is we always ask ourselves, what does North Korea want? And in the 2005 agreement, they told us, right? Yeah. They want energy assistance, they want economic assistance, they want security guarantees, they want a peace treaty. And so all that was in there, but it was sequenced on progress in denuclearization. I still think that's the best formula I've heard, and if anybody's got a better idea, I'm happy to hear it, but I haven't heard it. And I think if you did have progress, you'd have to. It'd be a very tricky issue to have some kind of gradual process, maybe a confederal state or something like that, where the question will be, how do you keep the North Koreans in North Korea in that context? Because they all know how magnificently successful the South has compared to them.
We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next topic. Now, time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is a cartoon on the New York Times. Title is Skating with the Enemy? ? The cartoonist asks, how will the Korea score in their 2018 Olympics debut? We can see Kim Jong-un and President Moon Jae-in skating together and also see President Trump at the back giving the score 0. Frank, what is your reaction?
What strikes me here is this sort of sumo figure of Kim Jong-un on the ice compared to the slender, svelte Moon Jae-in. And I do think that Kim Jong-un is sort of an outsized personality. And for a small, weak state, North Korea, he's projecting on the ice large. I also worry about the thickness of that ice with such a heavy weight on it. And I wonder if it's not all going to come crashing down.
Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a way it captures the proactive role of North Korea and the reactive role of South Korea in this whole process so far. And I think that's what jumps out at me. And the Trump part, I think it's a little troubling to me that it's one thing to make your point about human rights abuses in North Korea, but on the other hand, how do you solve it? If the whole point of maximum pressure is supposed to get us to diplomacy. So why are you raining on the parade of the South, which is trying to start a process of diplomacy?
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Frank, Robert, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from VOA, and I'm Eunjung Cho. See you next week.